All right, welcome back everyone. Ready to dive into some more sim racing tech.
Yeah, let's do it.
Today we're all about taming oversteer, specifically in Automobilista 2. AMS2, right?
Yeah, AMS2.
This sim is known for its realistic physics. And our listeners have sent us some really great questions about kart setup, focusing on those adjustable differentials and throttle control.
Yeah, those are key elements in AMS2 for sure. I think everyone who's driven it for a while knows that. It's a bit different from other sims.
Yeah, definitely. And especially since getting those dialed in can make a big difference in those lap times,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Huge. It can make or break your race. It's not just about speed, it's about consistency too.
Yeah, exactly.
AMS2, it rewards a smooth driver. You can't just muscle the car around.
Right.
So understanding those settings is super important.
Okay, so let's break this down. Let's start with adjustable differentials. The source we're looking at, it explains how important those settings are for controlling oversteer. But for those who might be, newer to sim racing or haven't really delved into this aspect, can you give us like a quick rundown of what adjustable differentials actually do?
Yeah, sure. Think of it this way. A differential, it's kind of like a little mechanical brain that sits between your drive wheels.
Oh, okay.
And its job is to manage how much power goes to each wheel.
Okay.
So especially when you're cornering, the outside wheel has to spin faster than the inside wheel, right?
Makes sense.
And the differential lets that happen smoothly.
Got it.
Now in AMS2, we have these adjustable differentials, which means we can fine-tune how that power split happens.
Okay, and so, like when we talk about those settings, what are the main ones that we're focusing on when we're trying to get that oversteer under control?
So the two big ones to pay attention to are the power ramp and the clutch settings.
Right. Power ramp. Clutch settings.
Power ramps, it basically determines how aggressively the differential transfers the power.
Okay.
So let's say you're coming out of a corner and you give it some gas.
Right.
Now one of your drive wheels starts to spin a bit.
That's the oversteer starting to kick in.
Exactly. Now the power ramp setting dictates how much that wheel is allowed to slip before the differential steps in and sends power to the other wheel.
Okay, so like a higher power ramp setting would mean more slip before the differential steps in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you increase that power ramp, let's say you go from like 50 to 70 or 80, you're allowing a little more slip before the differential really clamps down.
Gotcha. So is that something that would be more useful for certain types of cars? Like, if you're driving a rear-wheel drive car and you need a bit more rotation to get it pointed out of the corner?
Yeah. Rear-wheel drive, especially, you might find that bumping up that power ramp a bit can help you really get the car rotated and pointed where you want it to go.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about those clutch settings? What do they do?
Okay, so clutches are like, imagine you're holding a spinning rod in your hand.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
Now, the tighter you grip, the more directly that spinning motion transfers to your hand, right?
Yeah, I get it.
So in the differential, clutches work kind of the same way. The more clutches, the more direct, the more locked that connection is between those wheels.
Okay.
So a higher clutch setting, that means you're going to have a more direct transfer of power between the wheels.
Yeah.
But if you're finding that the car is really snappy, really prone to oversteer, especially on throttle, you might want to lower those clutches a bit. Maybe go from like 6 to 4.
Okay. So lower clutches, smoother power delivery, less likely to get that sudden snap oversteer.
Yeah, exactly. It just smooths things out a bit.
I see. So it's like a balance, right? You want enough lockup to get the power down, but not so much that it becomes super sensitive and you're constantly fighting the car.
Right. It's all about finding that sweet spot for the specific car you're driving and the track conditions.
Absolutely. Now, and speaking of sensitivity, we have to talk about the throttle in AMS2. The source mentions that AMS2 has this pretty unusual throttle torque curve.
Yes, it does. It's one of the things that makes AMS2 unique, and it can catch drivers out if they're not prepared.
What makes it so tricky?
Yeah.
Especially, for drivers who might be, used to other whims.
It's all about how the game translates that pedal input, what you're doing with your foot, into actual torque at the wheels.
Right.
In AMS2, you get a much higher torque at lower throttle inputs compared to other sims. It's like the first, say, 10 to 20% of pedal travel is amplified.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're used to a more like linear throttle response, where the amount of power you get is directly proportional to how far you push the pedal.
Right.
In AMS2, you might find that, whoops, you've gotten on the throttle a bit too aggressively and the rear end steps out.
Okay. Yeah. So it's almost like the game is more sensitive to those initial throttle inputs. You really have to be careful not to stomp on it.
Exactly. Smoothness is key in AMS2.
Right, right. Now, the source does offer some fixes for this.
Oh, yeah.
Can you walk us through some of those fixes?
Sure, sure. One thing you can do is adjust the pedal curve in your sim racing software.
Okay, so you can kind of remap that input a little bit.
Yeah. A lot of software, they have different curve options. You can make it more linear. You can adjust the sensitivity. So that can help to sort of tame that initial jump in torque.
Okay, great.
And then within AMS2 itself, there's a throttle sensitivity setting.
Okay.
The source recommends setting that somewhere between 30 and 35. Again, it just smooths out the response. But ultimately, beyond those settings, it really comes down to your right foot.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like even with all those tweaks,
Yeah.
you still have to really focus on smooth throttle application.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you're exiting corners.
Yeah.
Instead of just mashing the throttle, think about it more like you're squeezing it, gradually rolling onto the power.
Right, right. Almost like you're trying to squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube or something.
Yeah, kinda. It's a good analogy.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got these two key elements here for controlling oversteer in AMS2. We've got those adjustable differentials, which help us fine-tune how the power gets split between the wheels, and then we've got that throttle control, that smooth application of power.
Yes. And those two things really work together.
Right.
You can have the perfect differential setup, but if you're still stomping on the gas, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, you're going to be facing the wrong way.
Exactly. So practice that smooth throttle application. It'll make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And, the source really emphasizes how important those corner exits are. It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You nail that exit, you're carrying more speed down the straight, you're in a better position for the next corner. It's got to be such a satisfying feeling when you get it just right.
Oh, it is. It's incredibly satisfying when you get that perfect exit. The car's balanced, it's accelerating smoothly. You can just feel the speed building.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. Just to quickly recap, taming oversteer in AMS2, it requires that two-pronged approach, right?
Yeah.
You've got to fine-tune those differential settings to get that power delivery nice and smooth. And then you've got to master that throttle technique to make sure you're not overwhelming those tires.
That's a great summary.
But keep in mind, right, that every car, every track, it's going to require a slightly different setup.
Yeah.
There's no magic bullet here.
Exactly. And that's part of the fun of sim racing, right? Experimentation.
Yeah.
Get out there, try different things, see what works for you.
That's the beauty of it.
And don't be afraid to go back to the setup, make small adjustments. Maybe you start with the base tune, see how the car feels. Then you can start tweaking those differential settings, see if a little more power ramp helps with rotation, or if you need to back off the clutches for a bit more stability.
Right, right. And then of course, once you've got the car feeling good, then you can really start focusing on that throttle control.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing how smoothly you can apply the power without upsetting the balance.
Yeah, it's all about that finesse.
Exactly.
And, as you get more comfortable, start thinking about how these principles might change based on the car you're driving. Front wheel drive versus rear wheel drive. That makes a big difference in how you approach those settings.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then track conditions too. A wet track's going to require a whole different approach to throttle control and differential settings than a dry track. So there's always something new to learn, always something to refine.
Absolutely. And that's what keeps it interesting, right? So for all our listeners out there, get out there, experiment. Find those settings that work for you and enjoy the challenge. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy racing, everyone.